I've got Daniel Geltrude, who is a CPA and also an accounting professor and an all-around tax expert kind of guy. Daniel, thank you for joining me. What I'm looking at here, based on Donald Trump's campaign proposals, is he's talking about $6.2 trillion in tax cuts over the next decade. That, according to the Tax Policy Center. And if we factor in interest costs, then the federal debt, according to the Tax Policy Center, goes up by $7.2 trillion over the first 10 years and by nearly $21 trillion by the year 2036. What's wrong with that picture?
I'll tell you what's wrong with the picture is that most Americans don't actually understand the impact of the national debt on our economy. As that national debt continues to grow and those interest payments become larger and larger and larger, it simply becomes too much to handle. And we're really headed down a road of some significant problems unless Trump's tax plan is going to do some things that are going to dramatically change the direction that we're going in right now.
The national credit card bill needs to get paid off at some point, and as with your credit card bill, the higher it runs, the higher your interest rate runs, and the greater a credit risk you become. Is Uncle Sam in danger of becoming a bad credit risk?
I'm really glad that you used the example of a credit card because that really goes to the point I want to make here. If the average American had a credit card bill, let's say of $50 million, that number is so enormous it actually becomes meaningless because the person's going to say, I can never pay that off. I can never pay it off. Well, when we look at our country and we're encroaching $20 trillion in accumulated debt, it's the same thing. The number is so large, we're never going to be able to pay it off. And that's what I fear. People are just not paying attention to it, and we're headed, again, down the wrong road there.
We're speaking right now with Daniel Geltrude. He's a tax expert, and I find the whole trickle-down thing, which is exactly what I just described, to be so much hokum because it's never ever worked. And let me point to Exhibit A. George W. Bush cut taxes to the tune of trillions of dollars. And what happened? We went into a recession. Does that not tell the whole story?
I think what's happening, David, is Trump's model, and he alluded to it during the campaign. He's going down the path of Reaganomics. So the four pillars of Reaganomics is reduce taxes, reduce regulation, tighten the money supply, and reduce government spending. Now, let's just say that Donald Trump can do 1, 2, and 3. Reduce taxes, reduce regulations, tighten the money supply, so in effect keep inflation down. The problem, and the problem with George W. Bush, was in the spending. Let's just keep it simple. If you're going to be lowering your revenues and you don't want to come up net negative, you're going to have to reduce spending. But decreasing your revenues, increasing spending, all you have is in the red. That model is not going to work. So if Donald Trump is going to go down the path of reducing taxes, he's got control of both houses of Congress, so I believe he's going to get his tax cuts. The question is he going to be able to rev up the economy to such a great extent that the government can continue to spend? Probably not. So now the devil in the details is, what is the federal government going to cut?
But it's even worse than that, because if you cut those taxes for a federal budget that is already running deficits, and then at the same time you're talking about massive infrastructure building, massive rebuilding of inner cities, rebuilding of hospitals, rebuilding of our military, and God knows how many other massive spending plans, I just don't even see how that pencils out, and I don't care if you've got 10% GDP growth at that point.
It may very well not work out. So if you're asking me, based on that formula, what's going to happen, the federal government is going to continue to borrow, will continue to accumulate debt. When interest rates go up, our monthly payments are going to continue to rise, and we are really headed towards a significant challenge economically for the country. We've seen it happen with Greece and other nations around the world where they really, really get themselves in a whole lot of debt trouble, and other nations have to bail them out. So the question is, who is going to bail out the United States?
Oh, Russia. I have no doubts at all. Well, but to tell me, Daniel Geltrude, I mean, how do we get ourselves into this fix? Is it that the American people are just simply too stupid to understand basic financial literacy? Are we constantly being sold a pig in a poke by our leaders? Or is it the reality that our economy and our country are just so big that we are, in fact, too big to fail, and therefore we can cut taxes, spend like a sailor on shore leave, and not face any consequences?
I wouldn't use the term stupid, David, but what I would say is Americans are simply not paying attention. If you go back, starting with George W. Bush, so if we go back to 2000 through today, you're talking about we've increased the national debt by $15 trillion. Again, the number is so large, it's inconceivable to get our heads around it, and that's where I think the American people are getting lost. The number is so big, it's meaningless to them. It's just meaningless.
Well, let's zero in a little bit. Trump has talked about some fairly extensive changes in how we're going to do tax. He's going to slash the top business tax rate from 35%, which is the highest in the industrial world, to 15%, which he says will re-energize American companies and get things going again. Is that, in fact, the problem? Do we overtax our corporations?
I actually think that may be part of the problem. Remember, the tax code picks winners and losers, right? And those that win are the ones who are able to find the tax loopholes or the tax breaks. So when you're talking about creating a tax structure in the United States for corporations that's really going to be the lowest in the world, logic says that's the incentive that we are going to bring back those tax dollars into the United States. The question is it enough? I don't have the answer to that because we don't know how corporations are going to react. But logically, we're going to get some of that money back into the United States.
Well, but Trump has also told Apple, for example, if you bring the production of iPhones from China to the United States, you're going to get, quote unquote, a very large tax cut and, quote unquote, substantial regulation cuts. Is he basically bribing American companies to come back here and do business? And to me, what's amazing is the reason they're in China now is because you can use what's not, but close to slave labor over there. Here, you got to pay people an actual living wage.
Well, I think Trump's a businessman. He's not a politician, and I think he's working a deal. I think he views it as, right now, we're losing a lot of tax dollars, so we're getting nothing. So if I can cut a deal and I could bring some of that tax revenue back into the United States, it's a deal I should make. I'm not defending whether it's right or wrong or whether it'll work, but I believe that's what his negotiating process is going to be. And I think that's how his presidency is going to be. He's going to make deals.
Yet I've read that the vast majority of the Trump tax cuts will go to the very rich, the 1%, the 0.1%, who will have their taxes cut by thousands of dollars, whereas the typical working class family, if they experience any tax cut at all, it'll be in the order of a few $100. How is that equitable?
Some of that really relates to the fact that people at the lower end of the spectrum are going to have lower tax rates, but they're making less, therefore their savings is less. When you have people at the higher end of the spectrum and they get a tax cut, because they're making more, they're going to save more. So when you have a progressive tax system like we have, there's never really equality. That's how the system is built, whether we like it or not. So I understand what you're saying, and certainly the upper taxpayers, the highest level of earners in the United States are going to get a significant tax cut, but there are tax cuts across the board for everyone.
Everyone, Republicans and Democrats alike, are always talking about the importance of simplifying our tax system, which I suppose the tax code runs into the hundreds, if not thousands of pages. Is it possible in this country? And I don't mean that in a, oh yeah, anything's possible way, but is it realistic that we actually are going to be able to simplify our tax system to the point where if we're not filling it out on a postcard, as some have promised, then at least we reach a point where the system is understandable and accessible to all?
The filling your taxes out on a postcard, that actually started with Steve Forbes when he talked about having a flat tax. So if you're asking me whether we're going to be able to truly make the tax code less complicated, I believe the answer is no. And the reason I say that is because the tax code is used to make people do things. So they will move tax legislation around in order to get people to do things, whatever that may be. So if the federal government would like to see an increase in charitable contributions, they give you more tax relief if you make a charitable contribution. So I don't believe as much as we hear of the political rhetoric of we're going to simplify, we're going to make it flatter, we're going to make it fair. Ultimately, I don't think it happens because the politicians need it to be that way. That's my view.
I agree. Daniel Geltrude is a CPO and also an accounting professor and tax expert. Daniel, thank you so much for taking time out from your holiday. Happy Thanksgiving to you and yours.
Thank you, David. Same to you.
Much obliged.